In the world of fine art, where million-dollar paintings hang in pristine galleries, every brushstroke tells a story. Every creation holds secrets. Yet sometimes the greatest deception walks among the masterpieces, wearing a tailored suit and a practiced smile. Victoria Zhang understood art. She could spot a forgery at 20 paces, authenticate a lost Renaissance piece with unwavering confidence, and build a gallery that drew collectors from across the globe. For 20 years, she crafted her reputation with the same precision an artist uses to layer oil paints on canvas. Then she met him. Alexander Blackwood, charming, sophisticated, and as carefully crafted as any counterfeit masterpiece. He swept into her life like fresh paint on a blank canvas, and painted over her carefully curated world with strokes of romance and promises. But when the paint dried, Victoria discovered the truth. Her reputation lay in ruins, her gallery's name tarnished, millions in artwork revealed as forgeries. The art world turned its back on the woman who'd once been its rising star. They say revenge is an art form. Victoria Zhang was about to prove just how right they were. Welcome to True Crime Stories Archive, your gateway to the chilling world of real-life horror. Here, we delve into the darkest corners of humanity, unearthing stories that remind us how quickly destiny can turn. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe and join our community of truth seekers. Victoria Zhang's story began in a small apartment above her parents' Chinese restaurant in San Francisco. Every evening, while other children played outside, she sat by the window, sketching the golden light as it painted shadows across the city's hills. Her parents wanted her to study business or medicine, safe choices that promised stability. Instead, she chose art. At the San Francisco Academy of Fine Arts, Victoria didn't just study paintings, she learned to read them like others read books. She could tell you why Van Gogh's yellows spoke of madness, how Rembrandt used light to capture souls, and why a brushstroke could reveal an artist's darkest secrets. Her professors noticed. Gallery owners noticed. By her second year, she was interning at the prestigious Morrison Gallery, spending hours in their restoration room, learning how time could wound a masterpiece and how to heal it. In 2003, at just 26, Victoria took every penny of her savings and a loan that made her parents weep with worry. She rented a tiny space in the arts district, barely bigger than a storage room. The Zhang Gallery opened with 3 paintings and a dream. Victoria worked 18-hour days, sleeping on a cot in her office, eating instant noodles while studying auction catalogs. Her breakthrough came when she spotted something others had missed: a signature hidden beneath layers of paint on what everyone thought was a worthless landscape. That worthless painting turned out to be an early work by Thomas Hill, worth $450,000. The art world took notice. Victoria Zhang wasn't just selling art, she could see what others couldn't. By 2015, the Zhang Gallery occupied 3 floors in downtown San Francisco. Museums consulted her before major purchases. Collectors flew in from Europe and Asia, trusting her eye above all others. She developed a reputation for spotting forgeries that had fooled experts for decades. Her methodology was legendary. She would spend hours with a single painting, studying it under different lights, comparing brushstrokes under microscopes, researching its history until she knew every hand it had passed through. The gallery became her life, her identity. She could tell you the story behind every piece on her walls, the heartbreak that inspired it, the struggle to create it, the journey it took to reach her. But at night, when the gallery lights dimmed and the security system hummed to life, Victoria would sit in her office alone. She had built an empire of beauty, but she had no one to share it with. Her careful nature extended to every aspect of her life. She triple-checked provenances, photographed every artwork from 12 different angles, maintained detailed records of every transaction. Victoria believed in systems, in verification, in proof. She had seen too many collectors ruined by beautiful lies to trust easily. Each morning, she would arrive at the gallery at exactly 7:15 a.m., check every room personally, adjust the lighting to account for the season and weather. Her employees joked that she could spot a frame hanging 1 degree off-center from across the room. They weren't wrong. Victoria's attention to detail had made her successful. It had also made her lonely. At 45, Victoria John had everything she dreamed of as that little girl sketching in the apartment above her parents' restaurant. Her gallery was valued at $50 million. Her authentication services commanded fees that could buy small houses. Art magazines called her the Oracle of San Francisco. She had achieved every goal she'd set for herself. But success came with a price. Her relationships never lasted. Men found her intensity overwhelming, her dedication to her work obsessive. Her closest friends were the paintings on her walls, their frozen faces watching as she moved through her carefully ordered world. Victoria told herself it was enough. She had built something remarkable, something that would outlast her. She didn't know that everything she'd built was about to become the perfect target for a man who saw art not as something to preserve, but as something to exploit. A man who had studied her just as carefully as she studied her paintings, learning her patterns, her weaknesses, and most dangerously her loneliness. Alexander Blackwood entered Victoria's life on a rainy Tuesday in March. He arrived at the gallery precisely when she was most vulnerable. 3 months after losing her father, 6 weeks after a major exhibition opening, and 1 day after she'd had to fire her assistant of 5 years for attempted theft. The timing wasn't coincidence. He came to view a recently acquired Monet, dressed in a perfectly tailored Italian suit that spoke of old money without shouting it. His knowledge of Impressionist art impressed her immediately. He discussed brush techniques she'd only read about in obscure French journals. When he mentioned studying under Professor Laurent at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, Victoria felt her professional guard lowering. Laurent had been her mentor during her year abroad in France. "The light in Monet's garden series," he said, standing close enough for her to catch the scent of his cologne. "It reminds me of dawn in Givony. Have you been there?" His voice carried the slight accent of someone who had lived in too many places to belong to just one. When Victoria nodded, he smiled. "In spring? When will the water lilies first bloom?" "October," she replied. "The light was different then." "Ah, but October in Givony, that's when the real magic happens. The tourists are gone, the gardens turn golden, and if you arrive early enough, the mist creates these extraordinary effects on the water." He described exactly what she had witnessed 15 years ago, a private moment she'd thought belonged only to her. Alexander's background read like a novel. Educated at Oxford, trained in art restoration in Florence, worked with major auction houses across Europe. He dropped names casually, but always with intimate details that rang true. A private dinner with the curator of the Uffizi. A restoration project at a small church in Provence. Each story carried the weight of authenticity. Over the next few weeks, he became a regular visitor to the gallery. He never pushed for personal information. Instead, he shared his own stories, each one carefully crafted to resonate with Victoria's experiences. He understood her passion for the technical aspects of art, the chemistry of pigments, the physics of light, the subtle tells that separated masterpieces from forgery. Their first dinner together happened naturally, an extension of a conversation about a controversial Vermeer attribution that ran past gallery hours. He suggested a small French restaurant nearby, intimate but public enough to feel professional. The wine he ordered was excellent but not showy. He listened more than he spoke, asking questions that showed he'd paid attention to every detail she'd ever mentioned. Their shared passion for art became the foundation of their relationship. He sent her articles about upcoming auctions, asked her opinion on restoration techniques, shared stories about his encounters with famous works. Each interaction built upon the last, creating a sense of intimacy through shared knowledge and understanding. When Victoria mentioned a rare book on 17th-century Dutch painting techniques, Alexander had a first edition delivered to her office the next day. When she spoke of missing a particular exhibition at the Louvre, he recalled specific paintings in such detail that they could discuss them as if standing before them. He remembered everything she said, every preference she expressed. His gifts were thoughtful rather than extravagant: a set of antique brushes similar to ones used by her favorite artist, a portfolio of sketches from a little-known Italian master, a vintage catalogue from a gallery she'd mentioned admiring. Each present demonstrated not just wealth, but attention to her passions. By summer, Alexander had become not just a regular presence at the gallery but a trusted advisor. He introduced her to collectors who expanded her network, recommended artists who enhanced her inventory, suggested security upgrades that protected her investments. Each recommendation proved valuable, building his credibility layer by layer. What Victoria couldn't see was how carefully orchestrated each interaction had been. The rain-soaked Tuesday. The shared connection to Professor Laurent, who had indeed taught at École des Beaux-Arts, but had retired long before Alexander claimed to study there. The stories of Giverny in October, crafted from travel blogs and art books. The gifts, each one purchased with money taken from other women, other galleries, other schemes. Alexander Blackwood was creating his masterpiece, a portrait of the perfect partner, painted with brushstrokes of lies and varnished with just enough truth to make it shine. And Victoria Zhang, who could spot a forgery at 20 paces, who trusted numbers more than promises, who had built her reputation on seeing what others missed, was about to hang this counterfeit in the gallery of her heart. By autumn, Alexander's presence at Zhang Gallery had become as natural as the changing seasons. His integration into Victoria's business started subtly, a suggestion here, a connection there. He began spending more time in her office, watching her work, learning her methods. When she examined paintings, he stood close, asking intelligent questions that made her want to share every detail of her expertise. The first questionable artwork appeared in late September. A client, one of Alexander's European connections, requested authentication for a previously unknown Degas. Victoria's initial excitement faded as she studied the piece. Something felt wrong about the brushwork, yet the provenance seemed impeccable. Alexander stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. The way he captured the dancer's movement, he mused, reminds me of his work from 1873. His confidence made her question her doubts. When she hesitated, he gathered research supporting the painting's authenticity. Documents, historical photos, letters, a perfect paper trail. Victoria authenticated the piece. The client paid handsomely. Alexander celebrated by taking her to dinner at an exclusive restaurant overlooking the bay. Under starlight and fine wine, he first told her he loved her. More paintings followed. Each one carried small inconsistencies that Victoria's trained eye caught, yet Alexander always had an explanation. A Monet with unusual pigments? He experimented during that period. A Renoir with questionable brushstrokes. It was painted during his illness. His knowledge seemed endless, his reasoning flawless. Their personal relationship deepened alongside their professional collaboration. Alexander began staying late at the gallery, ordering dinner to her office while they discussed upcoming acquisitions. He learned her security codes, her filing system, her banking details, all under the guise of helping manage the growing business. Victoria found herself sharing more than just her professional knowledge. She told him about her childhood dreams, her parents' sacrifices, her fears of ending up alone. He listened with such intensity, such understanding, that each conversation felt like unveiling a new layer of intimacy. The gallery's reputation soared. Alexander's connections brought wealthy collectors from across Europe and Asia. Sales doubled, then tripled. Victoria's authentication services were in higher demand than ever. She hired new staff, expanded her exhibition space, and finally bought the building she'd been renting for 20 years. Yet questions began to surface. A collector in Paris questioned a certificate of authenticity. A museum in London requested additional documentation for a recent acquisition. Small discrepancies appeared in the gallery's accounts, nothing alarming, just numbers that didn't quite add up. Alexander had explanations for everything. The Paris collector was jealous of Victoria's success. The London Museum was being overly cautious. The accounting issues were simple clerical errors. His answers were so reasonable, so logical, that Victoria pushed her concerns aside. Their romance flourished amid the chaos of running the expanding gallery. Alexander surprised her with weekend trips to art shows in New York and London. He arranged private viewings at museums after hours. Each gesture made her feel special, chosen, understood. The mysterious buyers became more frequent. They appeared with valuable artworks, seeking authentication, always referred by Alexander's contacts. They paid in cash or through complex international transfers. Their names changed on documents, their companies existed in offshore havens. Victoria noticed these details, but Alexander's explanations grew more elaborate, more convincing. Private collectors value discretion, he would say. Tax considerations require complex structures. The art world operates on trust and relationships. Surely she understood that. And she did understand, because he had become her trusted advisor, her confidant, her love. By winter, Alexander had proposed marriage, presenting her with a ring he claimed belonged to his grandmother, a story as carefully crafted as all his others. Victoria said yes, surrounded by the artworks they had authenticated together, in the gallery they now shared. The Jean Gallery's reputation rested on Victoria's ability to separate truth from forgery, real from fake, authentic from counterfeit. Yet as she planned her wedding to Alexander Blackwood, she failed to see that she had become his perfect canvas, primed with loneliness, painted with love, and sealed with a varnish of lies that would soon begin to crack. The truth revealed itself on a quiet Thursday morning. Victoria arrived at her gallery earlier than usual, troubled by a strange email she'd received from the Louvre's authentication department. They wanted to re-examine a Monet she'd certified 6 months ago. As she unlocked the gallery doors, her phone buzzed with messages from other museums and collectors. She walked through her gallery halls, past paintings worth millions, each one authenticated by her hand. The morning light caught the surface of a recently acquired Van Gogh one Alexander had brought to her. Something about the way the light hit the paint made her pause. She moved closer, her heart racing as she examined the brushwork under her magnifying glass. The paint was wrong. Not just slightly off, wrong in ways she should have noticed immediately. Her hands shaking, Victoria pulled out her testing equipment. One by one, she examined every piece Alexander had connected to her gallery. Each test confirmed her growing horror. The pigments were modern. The canvases too new. The signatures perfect forgeries. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. News was spreading through the art world like wildfire. The unthinkable had happened. Jean Gallery, known for its impeccable authentication process, had certified dozens of forgeries. Victoria called Alexander repeatedly. His phone was disconnected. His apartment emptied. His supposed European offices non-existent. The man she knew as Alexander Blackwood had vanished, leaving behind a trail of devastation. His real name was James Morrison, a master forger and con artist known to Interpol under 12 different aliases. He had orchestrated similar schemes across Europe and Asia, always targeting respected authenticators, always disappearing before the truth emerged. Victoria's world collapsed within hours. Major collectors demanded refunds she couldn't provide. Museums publicly severed ties with her gallery. Art insurance companies launched investigations. Her professional reputation, built over 20 years of meticulous work, crumbled like aged varnish. The financial toll was catastrophic. The gallery's accounts had been drained. Loans taken out in her name. Insurance policies cashed in. Even her personal savings had vanished. The total losses exceeded $30 million. Victoria found herself facing bankruptcy, lawsuits, and possible criminal charges for unwitting participation in art fraud. Then the other women began contacting her. A gallery owner in Paris. An art dealer in Rome. A curator in Tokyo. Each shared a similar story: a charming man with extensive art knowledge, a whirlwind romance, a string of fraudulent authentications, and devastating financial losses. Their descriptions matched Alexander perfectly, though the names he used changed with each conquest. Every hour brought new revelations. Security footage showed Alexander accessing the gallery late at night, replacing authentic works with forgeries. Financial records revealed a complex web of transactions, moving money through dozens of offshore accounts. Email trails proved he had orchestrated both sides of many sales, posing as both seller and buyer. Victoria discovered photos of him with other women, all successful figures in the art world, all now ruined. She found marriage proposals identical to hers, rings claimed to be family heirlooms, love letters containing the same carefully crafted phrases he had whispered to her. Her gallery, once a temple to artistic authenticity, became a crime scene. Investigators filled her office, documenting every fake, tracing every fraudulent transaction. The press camped outside, hungry for pictures of the famous authenticator who had failed to spot the greatest forgery of all, the man she had planned to marry. At night, alone in her empty gallery, Victoria stared at the blank spaces where masterpieces had hung. She had built her life on the ability to distinguish real from fake, truth from lies. Now every certainty had been stripped away, leaving only one truth. Alexander Blackwood had made her part of his greatest forgery, and she had authenticated every brushstroke. The broken pieces of Victoria's life became her first clues. She applied her authentication methods to Alexander himself, analyzing every detail, every conversation, every transaction. Her gallery office transformed into an investigation hub. Photos, documents, and timelines covered the walls where priceless paintings once hung. She contacted each of his victims, piecing together his patterns. A gallery owner in Madrid recognized him from last spring. A museum curator in Vienna remembered him from 2 months ago. Each sighting, each transaction formed a map of his movements. Victoria tracked his forgeries like an art historian traces a master's influence, methodically, obsessively, completely. Her search revealed an operation larger than anyone had imagined. Alexander hadn't just stolen from galleries, he ran an international forgery network. Master forgers in warehouses across Eastern Europe. Authentication papers printed in basement operations. A team of actors who posed as wealthy collectors. Victoria discovered all of it, using the very attention to detail that had once made her famous. She sold everything she had left: her apartment, her car, her private collection. The money went into creating a new identity, one that could move through the exclusive art circles where Alexander hunted. She dyed her hair, changed her clothes, practiced a British accent until it became second nature. The trail led to Monaco. Alexander had resurfaced as Richard Somerset, a private dealer specializing in contemporary art. Victoria watched him from afar as he circled his next target, the wealthy widow of a shipping magnate. The same practiced moves, the same careful manipulation. Victoria rented an apartment overlooking the Monte Carlo harbor. She memorized his schedule, photographed his meetings, recorded his phone calls. Her walls filled with new evidence, not of crimes past, but crimes in progress. She learned his security codes, mapped his escape routes, studied his new forgery workshop hidden in an old villa. The Monaco Grand Prix auction would be his biggest score yet. 5 forged masterpieces, each worth millions, each authenticated by experts he had already compromised. Victoria knew this because she had accessed his files, studied his plans, learned to think like the man who had destroyed her. She booked herself into his target hotel. Arranged a chance meeting in the bar. Positioned herself as a potential investor. Used everything he had taught her about manipulation against him. Every move calculated, every interaction choreographed, leading to the moment when he would finally face the consequences of his crimes. The night before the auction, Victoria stood at her window, watching the lights of Monaco reflect off the Mediterranean. 20 years of building a reputation in the art world had taught her patience. 6 months of hunting Alexander had taught her precision. Tomorrow would teach him that some forgeries come with a price even he couldn't afford to pay. The Monaco Grand Prix auction began at precisely 7 p.m. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above the gathered elite as Alexander, now Richard Somerset, worked the room with practiced charm. 5 forged masterpieces waited in the wings, each poised to steal millions from unsuspecting collectors. Victoria sat in the third row, her face partially hidden behind an auction paddle. She watched him shine under the lights, commanding attention, playing the role of respected dealer. As the first forgery came up for bid, she raised her paddle. Alexander's eyes flickered toward her, then away. She saw the exact moment recognition dawned. The bidding reached 5 million euros when Victoria stood. Her voice carried across the hushed room. "That painting is a forgery." The auctioneer's gavel froze midair. "And I can prove it." She pulled out a folder containing evidence of Alexander's operation, photos, documents, testimony from other victims. Alexander moved toward the exit as Victoria projected images onto the auction house's screen. His forgery workshop. His multiple identities. His previous victims. The wealthy crowd erupted into chaos. Security moved in. Phones emerged to record the scandal. He reached the stairwell just as Victoria had predicted. She had studied the building's layout, knew he would choose this escape route. The stairs led to his private villa and to the edge of a decorative fountain overlooking the harbor. Victoria followed, her heels clicking on marble steps. She had removed the safety barrier by the fountain earlier that day. Loosened the ancient stones along the path. Created a trap as carefully crafted as any of his forgeries. Alexander ran, Victoria pursued. Their footsteps echoed through the stairwell. He burst onto the terrace, headed for the fountain, his planned escape route. The loose stones shifted under his feet. His momentum carried him forward. The missing barrier offered no resistance. The fall lasted seconds. Alexander Blackwood, master of deception, creator of perfect forgeries, plunged into the darkness below. His body was found in the harbor the next morning. The official ruling, accidental death while fleeing arrest. Victoria stood at the terrace railing, watching the police lights reflect off the water. Every detail had been perfect: the timing, the evidence, the pursuit. Even the missing barrier would be blamed on the building's age. She had learned from the best, after all. The investigation into Alexander Blackwood's death uncovered a web of deception spanning 3 continents. Police found forged masterpieces worth over $100 million in his Monaco villa. Files revealed hundreds of victims, gallery owners, collectors, museums, all caught in his elaborate schemes. The art world reeled from the revelations. Major auction houses launched massive authentication reviews. Collectors questioned their most prized pieces. The scandal exposed the fragility of a system built on reputation and trust. Every certificate, every provenance, every authentication came under scrutiny. Victoria Zhang cooperated fully with authorities. She provided evidence of Alexander's crimes, helped identify forged artworks, and testified about her role as both victim and witness. Her detailed records proved invaluable to prosecutors building cases across multiple jurisdictions. The media painted contrasting portraits of Victoria. Some saw her as a fallen expert who had failed to spot forgeries in her own gallery. Others portrayed her as a determined woman who had tracked down an international criminal when law enforcement couldn't. Art magazines debated whether her pursuit of Alexander represented justice or revenge. Her former clients slowly began to return. They recognized that Victoria's experience had made her even more formidable at spotting forgeries. Museums sought her expertise in building new authentication protocols. Her methods for uncovering Alexander's network became a case study in art crime detection. Victoria rebuilt her gallery, but differently. She focused on emerging artists whose work she could verify firsthand. She created a foundation to help other victims of art fraud. Her lectures on forgery detection drew crowds at universities and museums worldwide. The question of Victoria's involvement in Alexander's death lingered. The loose stones by the fountain. The missing barrier. The convenient timing. Police investigated but found nothing conclusive. Victoria's careful planning had matched Alexander's own attention to detail. 5 years later, Victoria Zhang's name carries new weight in the art world. She's known not just for her authentication skills, but for her role in exposing one of the largest art fraud operations in history. Her gallery hosts exhibitions on art authenticity, teaching collectors to spot the signs she once missed. At night, she still stands in her gallery alone, studying paintings under careful light. Her eyes catch different details now, not just brushstrokes and pigments, but the subtle tells of human deception. She sees the truth in layers, like paint on canvas, each one revealing a different story. The art world remembers Alexander Blackwood as a master forger who met a tragic end. They remember Victoria Zhang as the woman who brought him down. What they don't know, what they'll never know, is exactly how that end came about. Some truths, like some paintings, are meant to be kept in private collections. The line between justice and revenge often blurs when the heart bleeds. Victoria Zhang's story teaches us that trust, like art, can be forged with exquisite precision. The most beautiful lies can be painted with strokes of truth, creating masterpieces of deception that fool even the most trained eye. In this world of illusions, what separates the authentic from the counterfeit? A brushstroke? A signature? A moment of betrayal? Victoria chose her own canvas of justice, painting it with colors of calculated revenge. But at what cost does vengeance buy peace? Alexander Blackwood destroyed lives with his forgeries, turning trust into a weapon. Victoria Zhang destroyed him with the very skills he taught her. One could ask which of them created the more perfect deception. The man who forged paintings, or the woman who forged fate? Every person holds a breaking point, that precise moment when trust shatters like glass. Victoria's story forces us to question, would we have acted differently? When the law fails, when institutions crumble, when everything we've built turns to dust, what choices would we make? Pause. What do you think about Victoria's choices? Was justice served that night in Monaco, or did revenge simply create another victim? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have done the same in her position? Remember to subscribe to True Crime Story Archives for more stories that challenge our understanding of right and wrong. Next week, we'll explore another tale where the lines between victim and vigilante blur beyond recognition. Until then, remember, sometimes the most dangerous art isn't hanging on a wall. It's walking beside you, waiting to paint your life in shades of deception.